So, this podcast is brought to you by Milo's Sweet Tea.
Milo's Sweet Tea.
Made in Bessemer. Is that where it says? Bessemer, Alabama?
I can't read it. I don't have my glasses on, but it says no calorie, but it sure doesn't taste like no calorie.
It's delicious, isn't it?
It's perfectly delicious.
It's really good. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Pre-Accident Podcast. I am your loving host, Todd Conklin. How are you today? Are you good? It is September, the month of the Bluegrass Festival. I know I talk about it a lot, but it's because I rented a golf cart. And, you know, any place where I can drive a golf cart, I'm at my happy place. That is my happy space. I'm happiest when I'm golf carting-ish, golf driving, whatever I'm trying to say. Hey, anyway, I hope the year's going good. Can you believe it? It's the 9th month. What happened? You turn around and zam, it's gone. I'm just coming back off gigantic travel, like Herculean travel, crazy travel. And it was crazy because a better person would have scheduled this differently, but I was in Europe and then I had to go to Asia. And I had it all worked out perfectly that I could have like 3 days at home in between there. Except that coming back from Europe, my plane got messed up in London and I got trapped 20 minutes at a time. They wouldn't just tell me it was delayed. It was not, we'll be going in 20 minutes, sir. In 20 minutes, this thing will fly in 20 minutes. 20 minutes at a time. We were like 10 hours late, thank you, United. And by the time I got in, there wasn't enough time to go home for the weekend, so then I had to go directly to Asia, and I had no clean clothes. Luckily, where I stay, there's lots of clean clothes. You'll hear more about this Asia trip, I'm sure, because I recorded a great podcast with some people in Asia, because I was there and we were working together, and so I thought, why not? I can't think of a reason why not. And other than that, you know, I'm suffering a bit of burnout. I'll just be honest with you. I think I'm burning the candle at both ends, and it's burning towards the middle. And I can feel it. Today it hit especially hard. Darn it. I'm sure it's a combination of being jet lagged and just exhausted and not feeling good. And you know how it goes. You all these things you also suffer. But it's exciting because the world is, companies that are doing this safety difference stuff are really getting better. I mean, they're starting to see improvement, and there's all these testimonials, and there's all these people out there in the world excited, and so that part's good. I mean, you know, it's all pretty good, he says, which seems intellectually lazy, but that's kind of where I am anyway. I feel intellectually lazy. It's the September part of it. School's starting, at least in the United States, for those of us who hang out there. And so we're kind of back into the groove. It's just a matter of time till weather hits us. I just heard this weekend that it's supposed to be a very snowy but warm winter, at least for us. I don't know what that means, actually. Lots of melting, I guess. So that should be fun as well. And we've got a podcast for you, because this is a podcast, and that's why we're here. And if you could tell from the introduction, this podcast, by the way, isn't really sponsored by Milo's Tea. It's those great people at Alabama Power in Tuscaloosa sent me a case of Milo's Tea, and I liked it. And I said I liked it. I must have said I liked it loud enough that somebody heard me say I like it. And so the payoff was to give me some tea. So we were drinking Milo's Tea when we were recording this, and that's why we did the fake sponsorship. But if I had to sponsor, Milo's Tea would be one I'd sponsor. It's really good. It's delicious tea. There's no question about it. Delicious is the word I would use. But I was talking with Marc Yeston, and this podcast episode is an interesting one because this has been kind of an ongoing discussion around the 5 principles. So my premise is that we're getting kind of far away from the principles that that were initially established to sort of look at human and organizational performance and have been sort of the fathers and mothers of the new view. And so I've talked about the principles. In fact, I talked about them this year, and I'm working on a book on the 5 principles. One of those principles is the notion that context drives behavior, that behavior is a function of the organization's context. And Marc Yeston, whom you all know from his incredible experience with the Park Service and the work he does all over the world with pre-job, post-job, he's really good with adaptive workers who work in high-risk areas. Like he's great with linemen, firemen, helicopter rescue people, that kind of stuff, emergency medicine, wilderness doctors, NOLS. He does all that kind of stuff, right? So he was talking to me about this idea that that in fact, if context truly drives behavior, then isn't that manipulation? And he was saying, it kind of put air quotes around manipulation, as if it were sort of a morally bankrupt way to manage behavior. And so that's kind of what this podcast talks about, because that's a really good question. I mean, is advertising manipulation? Well, the quick answer is yes, it is. Is the way they design grocery stores manipulation? Yeah, that's manipulation. Is the way you have to shop on Amazon, if you do online shopping, manipulation? Yeah, that is. People who bought this also bought this, right? All those things are there to provide context, and that context then provides behavioral stimuli. It gives you a reason to do what you do. And that really is that third principle that we talk about a lot. And whether it's manipulation, bad word, or manipulation, good word, maybe that's something we should talk about. And so that is exactly what we did. And so that is this podcast. So if I'll shut up, you could actually hear this podcast, and that would be pretty cool too. So sit back and relax, open up your jar of Milo's tea, and listen to Marc and I discuss this very idea out loud in public on this very topic. Okay, so how's it going? What are you up to now?
Good, Todd. It's nice to see you. It's nice to be back at the podcast studios. I love what you did with the parking lot, adding some additional spaces for all the coming and going. Although that guy that collects the fees is kind of cranky.
Does it feel good to be a part of it?
Oh, it's huge, yeah.
You're happening in the podcast land?
Yeah, I love it. It's better than like birthdays at Denny's.
Birthdays at Denny's. So what you doing with the new view stuff? What you doing with safety stuff? What are you thinking about now?
I think about this idea of talking to people about how systems influence what workers do. So
that seems to be a big deal. That's one of the big 5 principles, that context drives behavior. And you asked about that earlier this morning. What is it about that bugs you?
Well, nothing bugs me about it.
Oh, sorry. I didn't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, just
let me ask it this way. Why on earth would you ask me that question?
Because I'm just curious about the examples that you use when you're talking to people about this stuff. And then you brought up a couple of great examples, actually several really good examples that I think make sense. And then we kind of tore that apart a little bit. You're starting off talking about grocery stores and how how the way the grocery store is set up. People frequently, if they're going on an unplanned visit to the grocery store, are just going to pick up some milk, a quick in and out. And of course, the milk is strategically located as far away from the front door as possible. So you have to go buy all the cool stuff. And, on your way back out with your milk, you think like, hey, here's the Hershey syrup. Need some of that too. And I think that there's a transparency to it. We know that we're kind of, for lack of a better word, being manipulated. We know that we're being steered a little bit in our behavior, and we kind of accept it. And then you talked about that fantastic anecdote of the bicycles getting damaged in shipping. You want to explain that real quick?
That's the one where the guy was having bicycles. He was shipping them from Europe to the United States. They weren't getting damaged in shipping. They were getting damaged between the time they took them out of the transportators and put them on like the FedEx truck.
Right.
And so they worried about it a long time, and they thought about it, and what should we do? Bigger box, stronger box, put giant fragile signs on it. And they ended up just printing a 70-inch big screen TV on the box.
Right.
So the box looks like it has a 70-inch TV in it, but in reality, it has a bicycle. So long story short.
Super effective.
Yeah, it totally worked, because the stevedores, the guys who unload the transportators, care more about 70-inch TVs than they do care about bicycles.
Right. A bicycle is much less fragile than a TV, and so you might be more inclined to think, oh, I can toss this and stack them a little bit higher, but I don't want to mess up somebody's TV. Totally makes sense. But then my thought about that was, if I'm the worker and I'm tossing those, or being very careful with those boxes that look like they're holding someone's expensive flat screen TV, and one breaks open, and one's always going to break open eventually, and I find a bicycle inside, I'm going to feel a little bit misled.
Right, and that's the part I find interesting, because you see the grocery store putting the milk in the back, right, or the expensive items at eye level,
yeah,
or printing a TV on a bicycle box, you see that as trickery.
I see it as non-transparent.
Which
See, if I go into the grocery
like,
store, I'm joining in on the...
Is that how a rich guy says trickery?
Well, I wouldn't know.
Can I say chicanery? Is it
chicanery is even better.
Yes. It's chicanery.
So, but no, I think like when you can understand pretty easily that the grocery store is there trying to manipulate you and sell you, and there's all kinds of cool stuff there. But it's like, so let's say instead of labeling that box with a TV, you put high explosives if you drop this is going to vaporize you, and then you found out there was a bicycle in the bag. You would think like, hey man, don't they give me some credit for this kind of thing?
Well, kind of. I mean, I actually think the high explosives would be you're introducing a lot of confounding variables into the argument.
No, I'm sorry. It's a Saturday, and we just ate some delicious Mexican food.
And Milo's Sweet Tea.
And Milo's Sweet Tea brought to you
this podcast brought to you by Milo's Sweet Tea.
That's right.
Thanks, Delane. So what's interesting to me is, and I really am kind of fixated on it, is that manipulation to you see as less than transparent.
No, I'm talking about forgetting transparency. I'm thinking about durability. And so the minute that first box cracks open and the person loading the boxes sees that they were being influenced by a false message, the whole thing makes sense to them, but then they will know from that period forward that a box that looks like this that says TV is actually a bicycle. I don't have to be as careful with it. That ruse didn't work on me. Now, take that to the other example we talked about with the additive tanks.
Right.
Now, I love that. That's elegant. And so describe that for the folks really quickly.
Okay, so imagine 4 long, skinny, pencil-shaped tanks. They're long and skinny tanks, and let's say they're 30 feet high, and they're in a row, and they're all in a line, and they're about 1 meter apart. Okay?
That's about 3 feet.
That's if you're left-handed.
Or $1.80 Canadian.
That's right. There you go. Go ahead and calculate. So I did an investigation where a person had to climb up a ladder, go to the top of the tank, check something, climb back down the ladder, go to the tank next to it, climb up that tank, go to the top and check it, climb down that ladder, go to the one next to it. There's 5 tanks in a row. And he had to check all 5 of those tanks, which means he has to climb up 5 ladders and down 5 ladders, unless he stays on the tank, which would be 4.5 ladders. But let's say he's coming down, so 5 ladders. And amazingly enough, what was happening, they're 1 meter apart, is the guy was jumping from tank to tank.
Or even just like going from guardrail to guardrail, like
right.
Having 2 or 3 points of contact and just making that leap, which works every time until...
Right, it didn't, right? And so let's say you can have 3 points of contact the entire time. And let's say he's done it a long time and it's normally pretty safe. I mean, clearly, if it's safe like that, it's incredibly efficient because workers really count on efficiency. Because if I don't have to make 10 steps today, I'm actually 10 steps ahead of tomorrow. So workers being like water are going to look for the path of least resistance.
People.
Right. Okay, people being like water are going to look for the path of least resistance, and so the guy jumped between them. So the question is he an idiot? Is he next on the list of LinkedIn videos that people show, which drive me bananas?
Me too.
All these like, look how dumb this guy is. Safety
look, they
matters.
Made scaffolding out of bamboo in India.
Don't be this guy.
That's right.
Or, in fact, can we look at that and say the system has some influence on that? Because if the tanks were farther away apart, so let's say the tanks were 10 feet apart.
Then you wouldn't consider jumping between them.
Because unless you're Spider-Man, you can't do it. But last week I was at a facility, and they had the same thing, 5 pencil-thin tanks, 30 feet high. But on one end, they had this beautiful, very gracious and casual staircase that led up with landings and a nice pitch, 7-inch rise. It was a great staircase. When you got on top of tank 1, lo and behold, there was a catwalk to tank 2, and to tank 3, and to tank 4, and to tank 5. And at tank 5, there was an emergency egress, climbing ladder with a cage and a parapet crossing.
So you wouldn't be trapped.
So you wouldn't be trapped on one side if the tanks blew up. And I will tell you that they will never have a person jump from tank to tank. Now, they built a system that manipulates the worker's behavior towards using the catwalk. Is that trickery?
Okay, so I don't think it's trickery.
Is that chicanery?
Chicanery. No, not even. What I think is it's fantastic and thoughtful design in the fact that the worker or the person looking at it would never be aware unless they thought about it or someone told them why it was designed that way. But once they discovered that they were using it in the way that it was designed, and it was designed with that safety in mind, it wouldn't even occur to a worker to jump among tanks because that would actually mean more work. Then if they saw what the design was, if it was explained to them or they just realized it over time or compared it to the initial tanks you talked about with the individual ladders, they would appreciate it. They would think like time was taken and design was thought to make this as safe and easy and efficient as possible for me.
Right.
And, of course, also for the company. And that would leave a better taste in my mouth than the box cracking open and saying, hey, it's a bicycle, not a TV, even though it works.
And yet I would suggest it's the same thing. And so if you look at principle 3, context drives behavior, the sort of the metric I would use, the definition I would use for that is we should make it easy for the worker to do it safely.
Yes.
And hard for the worker to do it dangerously.
Yes.
Okay, so if we do that, right, then we're actually building towards the collective goal of both the worker and the organization. But in fact, the organization is getting exactly what it wants. It's getting safe and reliable performance without injury, and all 5 tanks get checked.
Right.
So is that bad?
No, I don't think it's bad.
But grocery stores are bad.
No, I don't think grocery stores are bad. I think they're varying levels of perception.
So let me ask this: is advertising immoral?
No, I don't think so. Especially not the Geico ads. I love that lizard, all the stuff they're doing.
Everyone loves that lizard.
Yeah.
But the Geico ad, the one to watch is Flo.
Yeah, she's cool too.
I think Flo's very interesting. Mm-hmm. But this notion that somehow workers exercise free agency and that every accident, LinkedIn, here it comes,
right,
is a function of the worker being stupid is, in my opinion, and I could be wrong, I actually do think that's immoral. I think that's malpractice. I think if you look at the worker and say the worker had a choice and the worker chose to do it in a dangerous way, therefore the worker got injured, and somehow you're implying that the worker then therefore deserves to get injured, I don't know. I have a pretty hard time with that.
Yeah.
So what do we do with it?
I just like to work in a place that I can, once I see the design and I see the thought behind it, I realize that it's the way I probably would have done it if I had the budget and I had the engineering control over doing it.
Let me ask this question.
Yeah.
Your entire career, you worked with guests who interfaced with national parks.
We call them visitors.
I'm sorry, visitors.
Yes.
Who interfaced with national parks.
Uh-huh.
How did you manage their behavior to keep them from stepping on, I don't know, exotic lichen that only lives in one place, or baby turtles, or, I don't know, keep them on the trail? What'd you do?
It's a balancing act, because we would try to give people information that they could relate to without overdoing it, and in doing so having them disregard it, thinking they were just being handheld and over-parented when they were visiting the parks, which is a problem. Like, you stay in lots of hotels in the great state of California, right?
Yes.
And pretty decent hotels, too, I'm sure.
If you count Camp Electric as
Absolutely.
a decent hotel, and I do.
And every one of those hotels you walk into has a nice-looking placard on each floor that says, there are chemicals in this hotel known by the state of California to cause birth defects and cancer. And there's absolutely nothing for you to do about that.
Right. Yeah, you do see those.
They're everywhere by law. When you get on an airplane, same thing. And so people are bombarded by all of these messages that say, the hazards are real, the hazards are real, it's very, very dangerous. And then they know in their heart, well, a lot of this is not completely true, or a lot of this is, to protect for some liability or meet some sort of legislative or regulatory concern. It doesn't truly apply to me, or I'm willing to stay in this hotel and probably not going to get a birth defect because, I'm already born.
Yeah. Okay. That is helpful.
Yeah. And so when you tell people, honestly, don't pet the bison,
that guy got 18 days in jail or something, or 20 days in jail?
Yeah, some jail time and some mandatory drug and alcohol treatment and a ban from the parks for 5 years and all that kind of stuff.
So he was drunk.
He was, apparently. I mean, I guess it's been adjudicated now, but yeah, that's what I understand.
Oh, okay.
From popular media reports.
Speaking entirely as someone who has quite a history with buffalo, and I don't know if you know this, podcast listeners, but I have quite a history with buffalo. Someday I'll tell you the whole story. He was kind of a brave dude.
Yeah, or very drunk.
Yeah, or very drunk.
Yeah.
And there's a fine line between very brave and very drunk.
But if we're warning people in their hotel rooms, like, don't use this iron to get the wrinkles out of the clothing that you're wearing, and then we tell them don't go pet the bison, then they think maybe we're being overprotective. Or don't swim in the hot springs. Or
so
don't
how do you find that balance?
You try to be as transparent as possible, and you try to tell people, you try not to overwarn. Well, they went through this a bunch at Grand Canyon back in the 90s when there was a spate of heat fatalities, people just like dehydrating and burning to. They tried all kinds of approaches, and they tried a heavy-handed approach, like actual stop signs on the trail. Do not go past this stop sign, after this time of the day because conditions are so dangerous. And if you do and you require rescue, you will be, fined and humiliated and all these other things. And those lasted for a couple of years. And what we found there...
How well they work?
Well, what we found there is that people would go past the signs, of course. It would turn some people around. People would go past the signs, and then they would get in trouble. And when they got in trouble, they were reluctant to call for assistance because they knew they were going to face all kinds of humiliation and sanction and possible fines and things like that. And they would get themselves into more trouble by not calling for help in a timely manner. So then it went more to educational campaigns. It's really interesting. I actually went to educational campaigns like, hydrate or die, drink, drink, drink. And then they created this unintended consequence where people were actually overhydrating and getting into this situation that was called hyponatremia without getting too detailed there. But they basically water intoxicated. They overdid it trying to comply with the rule. They'd fill themselves up with water. They'd go down there and sweat. They wouldn't eat any salty foods, and they would get into this, pretty serious metabolic problem that ended up sending a whole bunch of them to the ICU for weeks at a time. And then they finally came back to a more moderate message, which is, not like an enforcement thing, like go past here, you're going to get in trouble, but, eat and drink as you go in and out of here, and here are things to consider. And then, really successfully, they actually got some funding and put some volunteers and newbie rangers on the trails to just kind of talk to people.
Right.
Like, hey, I see you and your Chihuahua and your Diet Pepsi are planning to hike to the bottom of the canyon. It's 135 degrees down there today. Maybe we can suggest a different hike. And they would just, in a friendly way, turn those people around and give them some education. That really, really helped.
And didn't you also cache water and food along the trail?
Yeah, under lock and key.
So I wasn't supposed to say that. Was that?
Yeah, so people,
that's secret.
Yeah, that's a secret.
Or we'll edit this out. Don't you worry. This will be edited out in a minute.
And Oreos too, Todd.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Because if you're telling somebody that they're going to have to spend the night down there and they're not going to get eaten by something, they're going to be okay, but nobody's going to send a night flight dirigible or helicopter down to get them. And by the way, if you key into this box, there's some water and there's some military rations, and if you look really hard, you're going to find some Oreos too. That's going to make the night go better.
Well, yes.
Yeah.
Who would disagree with that?
But please don't break into the strong boxes for the Oreos.
I know that's going to be edited out, so don't worry, Mark. You don't listen to this podcast, so you're fine.
Right.
It'll be. In fact, it's gone now.
Yes.
So that's interesting.
So overwarning, because I think we live in a culture where we're overwarned quite a bit about things that we can rationally see. This isn't really about protecting me.
And you understand why overwarning doesn't work, do you?
Yeah.
So there's two things. One is the law of small numbers,
right?
Which is that happens to everybody else.
Yes.
But the odds are actually that it won't happen to me.
Correct.
Right? And then couple that with an optimism bias, with the belief that I'll be fine.
Right. Look at my shoes.
I'm almost always fine.
Yeah.
And I can do this because I've done stuff like this before, and I've always kind of gotten away with it. I've been
all the time. Like, I can go for 4 hours on the Stairmaster. This is no big deal.
Not that big. Yeah. Right? That's interesting to me. So, is it trickery? Is the bicycle box trickery?
I think it's really, really effective. I think it's demonstrated as effective.
Yeah,
but
I know it works.
When the curtain gets pulled back, it risks being less effective. And if the goal is to maintain that effectiveness and achieve that goal of not damaging the bicycles in this case, then once the curtain is pulled back or the mask is pulled off and they see, the thinking behind it and how it was supposed to influence them, they may be less likely to comply because they know that I can mishandle this a bit because it's not really TV, as opposed to if somebody said, this thing that you're using, these tanks, for instance, notice how they're laid out. They're laid out to make your job easier and better. And I would feel in that case like, wow, somebody put some thought into really caring about me and didn't have to manipulate me. I hate to use the word manipulate, but, it is manipulation. I'm not sure the word. But it's not manipulation in a bad way. It's manipulation toward people's well-being.
So let me ask this question then, Ranger Rick.
Oh, here comes another one.
Yeah, are safeguards permanent?
I don't think so. I think it depends.
That was a super
wimpy.
Yeah, like if a wuss answered a question.
Yes, I'm going to put an X in the center box on that.
Yeah, I'd like to. On a Likert scale, I'd be at right now 3.5.
Oh, there you go.
It's 3.5 on a Likert scale, modified Likert scale actually, because it's just 1 to 7
metric.
Well, so everything is always degrading,
right?
And so if everything's always degrading, then every safeguard you put in a system over time will fail. Because it'll wear out or break.
Rust.
It'll definitely normalize, so we'll start to actually depend on that. And at some point, it'll become a production advantage. We'll use it to actually get work done faster.
Yes.
So should we stop trying?
No.
Huh.
What do you think?
Well, I think this is a very interesting discussion. I think mostly what this is about is, does mankind exercise free agency, or is mankind predetermined by larger contextual pressures that exist upon us all the time? And I'm not sure I have an answer to that.
That's been getting worked on for some time now.
Yeah, maybe smart people somewhere will solve this problem.
Yes.
But I think leaders think, especially in retrospect, especially after something happens, that the worker actually had free will, and that every decision that was made was entirely a function of the worker specifically making the decision
a rational choice.
Yeah, a rational choice to do something stupid.
Right.
And I think in context, before the event happens, I actually think many things that we see as choices
are not.
In fact, they're oftentimes just responses to the environment in which we find ourselves, whether that be a grocery store or a box of bicycles. Well, I guess there's only one bicycle in the box.
Oh.
Or going down a trail with a Diet Pepsi and a Chihuahua in the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
So I think we'll work for a long time.
I think so.
I think we have almost permanent employment. The fact that it's a moral question or a non-moral question, that's very interesting to me. So, and I think that's part of what we want to change, is we want to help people understand that when they put a video up of a guy who knocks a loader into a ditch or something, whatever, I don't know, there's a ton of them always, that actually what that is doing is standing in moral judgment in retrospect of a worker who probably at the time was simply trying to move the digger across the ditch.
Well, the one that really got me going a while back, I tried to restrain myself, but there was a video of a really nice Airbus, and there was a tug below it, and the tug caught on fire and was pretty quickly engulfed. And at every airport there are those fire extinguishers with the big wheels.
Yeah.
And the whole model for using those fire extinguishers is, if a fire breaks out, you hit the panic button and get the response going from the, on-field fire department. This was a big, international airport setting, so they certainly have a fire department, but there is a response time. And the whole model for using a fire extinguisher is to try, if it's possible, to limit the, the progression of that fire until they get there with the big guns or the big trucks in this case, right?
Right.
So here's a video of guys that are operating the tug. The thing bursts into flames. The fire extinguisher is right there. They grab it. And it's windy and stuff like that, and it's a fuel fire, and they're hitting it with the fuel, but they're not in PPE because that's not how fire extinguishers work. They don't come with, fire retardant clothing and SCBA. It's a fire extinguisher. And so they exhaust the fire extinguisher as they're retreating, and then they run away from the thing. And then the comments from that post was, the first one would say, this is a clear violation of ACIO or ICAO, section 41, honestly, down to the paragraph. And there was 2 sentences of citations of the violations that were taking place, and the fact that they weren't in PPE, and the fire responders didn't respond in a timely manner. And again, this whole video clip is about 18 seconds long, so I've never seen a fire department that can get to a fire in 18 seconds. But with the benefit of retrospect and this, comfort share bias that we have. I don't want to call it bias. I just think it's kind of cruel to sit there and judge those people and list, like, here are the idealized procedures that were not followed to my satisfaction in this case was crazy. And that's why I couldn't restrain myself when I tweeted back, or I didn't tweet, whatever it's called. I posted back and I said, well, maybe the fire department was delayed because they were watching a PowerPoint presentation on ICAO chapter 41-61. And then I hit send and I felt terrible afterwards. I didn't mean to be rude to the guy. I said, man, I want your job where you just get to sit there and criticize people who are actually trying to put the fire out.
That's good.
So, but it just bugs me because I don't think it makes us any better. When you see people out there struggling in unexpected circumstances or strange combinations of really common circumstances, you can see that they're actually trying to make sense of what's going on and do the right thing. And when it goes wrong, it's really easy to sit there and say, like, well, obviously they should have chosen B instead of A, so let's bring everybody in for A over B training and fire these guys or, suspend them or something like that. When in fact, that's just the way the world works every day. We're constantly having to make decisions. And I think that, honest workers, and I think most workers are honest, are trying to think the next step I take is probably the absolute best thing to do in this complex situation that I'm struggling with. And they don't know that it's going to be bad. And we don't know it's going to be bad until it doesn't work. Had that fire extinguisher put out that fire, those guys would have been heroes. Nobody got hurt. I mean, plane got burnt up pretty good. But, they did exactly what the system was designed to do.
And that, my friend, the best definition of local rationale I've ever heard, is a pretty good place to stop this podcast. Thank you, Mark.
Well, thanks, Todd.
You're welcome.
Talk to you soon.
See ya. And that is the podcast for today. What do you think? Would you change your life? Did your life feel changed? Yeah, turn the sound up a little. It was fun. That was a great conversation. It's always fun to spend time with Mark. He's great. Give him a call. If you've not worked with him, you should. He is a fun guy. Fun. All right, so that's the podcast. Talk to you Wednesday, and then maybe again Saturday, and then Wednesday, and then Saturday. We do this kind of a lot, don't we? If you're new to the podcast, thanks for listening. If you've listened for a while, tell your friends. Tell your friends and subscribe. That makes a big difference. Until then, learn something new every single day. Have as much fun as you possibly can. And for goodness sakes, be safe.